Alright guys, here we are for week 5 of the clampdown. John O'Brien, Jamestown Community College, History 1520. This lecture will cover the first half of chapter 36, New Conflagrations, World War II and the Cold War, which in my interpretation are really separate topics. Of course, World War II leads to the Cold War, but really they're in many ways separate eras. Okay? And that's just a matter of looking back to more recent history. Okay? But we will probably start getting into material that you're familiar with, that you've heard of, at least your parents or grandparents lived through, so you can ask them about it. Right? The history you're living through is the COVID-19 pandemic. So history is the study of change, right? Our lives have changed over the last month. Hang in there. You're doing a good job, those of you in Chautauqua County. Sadly, we've had 3 deaths in the county due to COVID-related illness. I think the tested infection rate, is about 22. So doing a good job on the clampdown. The harder we clamp down, the less widely spread this will become. We'll protect our healthcare workers from being overwhelmed, and we'll work to buy us some time while we work on a vaccine. Okay, so let's see what happens. Be hopeful for the summer that we can at least partially begin to open up our society again. Until then, as you're hunkered down, you have time for history. Okay, so here we are, chapter 36. We're moving our way through the semester. This topic is actually scheduled for the week of April the 27th. Here I am on the week of April the 12th. So if you're watching this now, or April 12th, 13th or so, you're ahead of time. If you want to wait till the 27th, that's fine. We will have a 4th and final exam just on the 4th unit. That'll be chapters 33, 34, 35, 36, and 37, due on May the 13th. I'll get that out to you a week ahead of time. As with the previous exam, it will be all essay. Probably an essay from each chapter, so more essays this time, but fewer points per essay, all right? It's still a week to do it, and I'll be through Blackboard. All right, so tonight, looking at the news, some European countries looking at easing their lockdown a bit. That is under debate, right? This is a novel virus, meaning it's new, right? We're not sure how this will react. If we begin to lessen the clampdown, will the virus start spreading widely again? Probably, okay? This is a matter really of statistics, so you math majors can see the use of your discipline, right? What number do you need to have before you can do effective tracing? Okay, when there's a case, that person was in contact with 10 other people, trace them, quarantine them instead of the whole society. So very interesting times we live. Stay healthy. Take it very, very, very seriously, all right? If you're going out into public, authorities are now saying wear a mask. Even if you have to make your own, which you probably will have to do, there are ways to do that. Google it. It can be pretty simple. But keep in mind that a mask only really protects others from you. It doesn't really protect you from others, but we should all be wearing them, all right? If everyone wore a mask, probably the rate would drop precipitously. So wear a mask when you're out in public, sanitize things, wash your hands, all right? Stay home, all right, unless you're an essential worker. And if those of you who are my grocery store workers out there, I know I have students who do that, kudos to you, good job to you. Be very, 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 very careful, all right? Take it really seriously. I know when you're young, when I was young, I tended to think I was invulnerable. I was not, neither are you. So take it seriously. And even if you don't become quite ill, you can spread it to someone who could be, all right? So enough with that for now. I know you're kind of filled up with this stuff. Let's go back to even worse times. Maybe that'll make you feel better, all right? As bad as things are right now, imagine living through the late 1930s into the 40s. Okay? I actually just got an email from someone in Utah who was looking through her grandfather's photo album and found a photo of a guy from Jamestown, New York, who used to be my boss, not at JCC, but at summer camp. And she Googled the fellow's name, Spiro Bello, found the summer camp, sent us the photo, and here's this 19-year-old young man, 1942, September, heading off to fight in World War II. And I thought, well, if he can do that, we can do this. Okay, so let's we're in this together. Let's take heart that we've been through some tough times as societies, and we've made it through if we've been smart and just a bit lucky. So chapter 36. Leading up to World War II, new conflagrations, yes, new blow-ups, right? This war will be, I think, easier to understand than World War I, the Great War. The Great War, you had an essay on it, right? Many, many causes, multi-causational, nationalism, alliance systems, rival imperialisms, a whole lot of stuff going on, right? World War II we can really pin on, well, World War I, if you really want to simplify it, or revisionist nations. Nations that wanted to change the outcome of World War I, especially Germany and Japan and Italy. And you might recall, like, Italy and Japan were on the winning side of World War I, so what's the big deal? They did not get what they thought they deserved, frankly. Okay? Germany, punished after the war, the end of the war, basically wanted to revise the Treaty of Versailles. So by revisionist nations, we say those that wanted to revise the Treaty of Versailles, the end of World War I. Okay? So, the Axis nations, we will call these countries, Germany, Japan, and Italy, the Axis nations. It really begins with Italy and Germany. If you go from Berlin to Rome, that was supposedly the axis or the axle upon which all of Europe rotated. Fortunately, in some ways that comes true, but not to the benefit of Europe. This war will become total fairly quickly. In it, civilians will be targeted in a way they had not been in previous wars. You do have some examples of medieval combat, of entire cities laid waste, or maybe Sherman's March to the Sea, Atlanta and the Civil War, but here entire populations will be targeted, and life will become difficult for people living under occupation, and even people who are not occupied. Let's think the British laborer, okay? British workers, women drafted into factories in Britain. Life becomes difficult, even if you were not conquered by the enemy. The Cold War will follow it again. I will use that as a separate topic, but by 1947, the World War II allies, the United States and the Soviet Union, become really vehement enemies in a war that they say does not turn hot. The Soviet Union and the United States do not directly go to war with one another, but there's war by proxy, by getting other nations to fight. For example, the Soviets will fund and equip and train the North Vietnamese to fight the United States. The United States will fund, equip, and train the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union, the Soviet soldiers, Soviet Air Corps. So we see these proxy wars, we see a massive buildup of arms directed against one another, huge spending through the military-industrial complex of both nations, a war of espionage, okay? A war in which we see this great struggle between two great powers, superpowers, that lasts really until 1989, 1990, certainly by 1991, the Cold War had come to conclusion because the Soviet Union, by December 25th of that year, ceased to exist as a nation. That did not come about through a destructive war. The Soviet Union essentially dissolved into its component republics. Let's go back well before 1991 to 1931. Okay? Revisionist powers will violate the Treaty of Versailles. Although the treaty said Germany could not have a military, it will remilitarize and expand its forces. Japan, let's go first with Japan if we want to look chronologically. In 1931, Japan will occupy Manchuria. It's the Great Depression. Okay? Japanese troops will blow up a Japanese-owned railroad in Manchuria, part of China, and blame the Chinese, and then send an army in to protect the railroad. See how this works, okay? And come to claim Manchuria essentially as a colony called Manchukuo. 6 years later, there's a full-scale invasion of China proper through Nanjing, which was the capital at the time. This is appropriately and unfortunately known as the Rape of Nanjing. So you can sadly imagine what happened to Chinese civilian women. Okay? Chinese civilian men will be executed. Chinese women will face execution, rape, sometimes both. Chinese, however, will resist. Okay? Keep in mind the Chinese had been embroiled in their own civil war between the nationalists called the Kuomintang, GMD, or KMT, depending on how old your textbook is. Basically, these are the Democrats. Okay? Weakly led, they don't control much of China. They're at war with the communists who've been kind of chased well into the interior of China, but have gained strength in so doing by appealing to the peasants as this is the new proletariat. You don't have to be a factory worker to be against the system of inequality, against capitalism. You can be a poor peasant, be against your landlord. Okay? So Mao Zedong, who had been a librarian, appeals to the Chinese peasantry and the Chinese CCP, Chinese Communist Party, grow in power. In a sense, that civil war is to be put on hold while both the Kuomintang and the communists fight the Japanese invasion. Italian aggression. Italy will be on the winning side in World War I, but will not gain what it thought it was due, especially in the Balkan region, the Adriatic Sea. It had suffered a major loss at Caporetto by the Austrian army. Did not fare as well as it thought it should have. This will lead to an outpouring of Italian nationalism, especially at the hands of Benito Mussolini. In the early 1920s, right, Mussolini's black shirts will inflict violence upon communists in Italy. And to grossly oversimplify, and for anyone watching who's not in this course, this is an introductory course. This is just a broad survey overview. So to oversimplify, Mussolini's black shirts, so-called fascists, which took the symbol of the Roman Empire, right? Sticks bundled together or cannot break, and one stick can break, that type of thing, right? Preyed upon communists and socialists in Italy. And they gained the support of people with money, right? So if communists want to make a society of economic equals, and I own a factory, I'm probably against that. If I own a large farm, I'm probably against that. If the communists want to get rid of religion, and I'm a devout Catholic in Italy, I'm probably against the communists. I might even support Mussolini. God forbid I would have, right? Thankfully, I can stand here nearly a century later and see the errors. But if politics becomes rather binary between the far left, the communists, and the far right, the fascist, people with property, people who want a tradition, people who loved Italy as a nation instead of this internationalism the communists were espousing, just might support Mussolini. Okay. Mussolini will come to power through a march on Rome, although he wasn't part of that march himself in 1925. In power is Il Duce as the leader. He takes the Italian army on an imperial quest into Ethiopia, which is chemically gassed. The people of Ethiopia are chemically gassed by the fascists. The Ethiopian king Haile Selassie appeals to the League of Nations. We're a League of Nations member. We're being attacked. The promise is that nations will come to our defense, but no one did. Okay. And Selassie says, you will be next. And of course, he was right. Other nations would be next. It was soon going to be too late to stop the fascists, who move into Albania. Italy takes Albania, which was always kind of a goal of the fascists, was some of these Balkan lands, especially on the Adriatic coast, Albania, and makes an alliance with Germany in 1936. This is almost more than a decade after Mussolini had been in power. Initially, Hitler and Mussolini did not trust one another, but they come to make this Axis, Berlin, Rome, Axle of Europe alliance in 1936. They team up to help the fascist Francisco Franco, the Generalissimo, nationalist general, traditionalist general in Spain, in the Spanish Civil War, in where we will see Italian troops and German planes, brand new German planes bombing the Democrats, the socialists, the communists of Spain, the simple people of Spain in the Spanish Civil War that wages for 3 years. The fascists win. Okay? The fascists win that struggle. So this was kind of a trial run in some ways for Hitler's Nazi war machine. German militarism will be on the rise after Hitler's party's election. They got no more than about 40% of the vote in the parliament, of the Reichstag. Through a complicated series of events and political dealings, the Nazis became the majority party. Hitler becomes the prime minister. The Reichstag is burned. The Nazis blame the Communist Party as terrorist and outlaw the Communist Party. They give Hitler more power through enabling acts. He becomes really all-powerful dictator. We call this totalitarianism. The individual will be totally subordinated to the state. And the state is really the party by this point. Okay, there's really just one party. It's the Nazi Party. People who speak out against the Nazis, civil libertarians, history professors, will find themselves out of a job initially, in prison, and even worse eventually. Hitler will begin to remilitarize Germany as one way of giving Germans jobs. German unemployment rate was over 35% in 1932. So Hitler's appeal is largely promising jobs, promising the German people pride, the world will be proud of Germany again. His party doesn't get elected promising World War II or promising a Holocaust. Very few people had read by that time Mein Kampf, right? Hitler's struggle. And those who supported Hitler's rise of power, the army, the president, and the elderly man Hindenburg, they thought they could control Hitler. But Hitler, look, no military genius. He was a flunky. He was anti-intellectual. He did have a penchant for art. But the people around Hitler were anti-intellectual. They're anti-urban. They wanted to appeal to a rural, agrarian, same thing, simple German past. Okay? So these aren't smart people for the most part. But he was smart in his ability to appeal to the emotions of the German people. Right? The German people are hungry. They want jobs. They want to be proud. They felt that they had not lost World War I. They felt they'd been kind of stabbed in the back. This is the great lie that Hitler says. Jewish people somehow, and communists stabbed Germany in the back, and that's how it lost World War I. Okay? So we can appeal to that emotion, not to the critical thinking, but to the emotion of the German people. Psychologically speaking, a lot of young Germans who have no fathers have died in World War I. So psychologists have a lot of interest in looking at the German mindset at this time. So Germany remilitarizes. By 1938, Nazis had also come to power in neighboring Austria. Austria is absorbed into Greater Germany. Okay? Without a fight, Austria becomes part of Germany, which meant the Jews who were already suffering in Germany now immediately suffer in Austria. It becomes another, I think, 2 provinces of Greater Germany. Then Hitler begins to demand land to the east. They would argue that when the borders of the new Europe were drawn, that part of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland was home to Germans. It had always been German. There are 2 million Germans living there. The border's in the wrong place. And it needs to be moved. That part of Czechoslovakia should be part of Germany. So what happens? He's threatening war. Basically, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, French counterpart Mussolini, and Hitler meet in Munich, Germany a few times. Chamberlain flies back and forth from London to Munich, Germany, to work out a deal that basically gave away the Sudetenland to Germany. And all the people living there now fall under German rule, especially including a lot of Jewish people. So this is infamously known as appeasement, giving Hitler a little bit in the belief that he won't take more. And Chamberlain, here he is, okay, coming home. I think this is Heathrow Airport. I have Hitler's signature promising no war. All he wants is Sudetenland, and all will be good. This was just a test case. Hitler's going to see the Western democracies as weak. The British aren't going to do anything. The French aren't going to do anything without the British support. The Americans are below the Great Depression. With all due respect to FDR, the United States isn't going to do anything, except maybe lodge a protest. Okay? So the Sudetenland becomes part of Czechoslovakia. Then within a year, the entire country becomes part of Germany. Well, there's absolutely no nationalist rationale for Czechoslovakia to become part of Germany. The British and the French now they say, if Hitler takes any more territory, it shall be war. But again, Hitler does not see the democracies as viable, as a threat, and begins to demand more territory, this time from Poland, called the Danzig Corridor. It's actually where Gdansk, Poland is now. It was the Polish kind of, I don't want to say channel, the Polish connection to the sea, so Poland would not be landlocked. Hitler begins, these people, these are German people, should be part of Germany, etc. British and